I'm Tammy Bruce.
I'm Juan Williams.
I'm Shannon Bream, and this is the Fox News Rundown. Wednesday, October 20th, 2021. I'm Lisa Brady. Over 200 million Americans have received at least one dose of COVID vaccine. Employees who still don't want it may face a losing battle in court.
As a general rule, I think courts are going to be supportive of companies adopting these types of vaccine requirements, including boosters.
I'm Dave Anthony. We've all heard a lot of bad stuff about the Trump White House. Today, a much different view from an advisor who was there all 4 years and has a new book.
And I wanted America to see, because it's a different type of person that was portrayed in the press out there, and they've got it wrong, because I saw him. I mean, I saw him for longer than anybody else in the White House and the national security realm.
And I'm Tammy Bruce. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Forced to choose between getting a COVID shot or losing their job, some people are walking away, including essential workers.
We worked 18 months without having any type of issues, and now suddenly we have to have these mandatory vaccines.
Robert LeMay resigned after 22 years as a state trooper in Washington state and says there was no question about his decision not to take the vaccine.
The process, how they did it, was ridiculous, and making people do this or you're losing your job was ridiculous.
Washington's vaccine mandate for state employees does not include a testing option. It does include a religious exemption, but LeMay says he was ultimately told he'd have to switch jobs, take a pay cut, and potentially move. Chicago is beginning to withhold pay from unvaccinated police officers, and lawsuits have been filed over the city's vaccine mandate. Top White House COVID advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci was asked by Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace about the potential public safety impact of police, pilots, and health workers threatening walkouts, and whether mandates should continue to be enforced in those cases.
We know now the statistics. More police officers die of COVID than they do in other causes of death. So it doesn't make any sense to not trying to protect yourself as well as the colleagues that you work with.
Fauci says he's not comfortable telling people what to do in normal circumstances, but that these aren't normal circumstances. And as private employers face a new federal rule for vaccination or testing, the courts so far have not been kind to mandate challengers.
Part of the reason for the poor record on challenges is that the Supreme Court many years ago accepted a state vaccine mandate in Massachusetts. That is still governing authority.
Jonathan Turley is a law professor at George Washington University and a Fox News contributor.
The courts are following that Jacobson case, particularly when it is a state mandate. It gets a little tougher if it's a federal mandate. There's very good arguments against the suggestion of the Biden administration that they could just impose a mandate. And I think the Biden administration has pretty much recognized that, because when they went with the current mandate, they filtered it through the Department of Labor as an OSHA or workplace requirement. And that was very clever, but it was really an effort to avoid this issue, that they're just treating this as part of the mandate to guarantee workplace safety. Now, whether that succeeds or not, we'll see, but it's a stronger basis than just imposing a direct mandate. So this is a public health issue, and courts tend to defer to the states. And they also have the support of the CDC. And so judges are very reluctant to countermand or disagree with the CDC. They're likely to accept the view of the CDC that this is a necessary public health measure.
Some of the mandates are facing some very detailed arguments. For instance, pilots suing Southwest, arguing the airline is supposed to maintain the same working conditions, rates of pay, and rules while the union's negotiating a new contract. Does a case like that have a better chance of succeeding?
You know, I still think that the airlines have a stronger case there. The strongest cases, in my view, involve those raising religious exemptions. There's now a building movement to refuse even exemptions on the basis of religion. That, I think, could have much greater success in the courts. There's also this question of natural antibodies. There are studies out there that show that recovering from COVID gives you the same, if not better, protection than a vaccine. If that's true, and I can't really speak to the science, the courts would be in a really tough position if you don't allow antibodies to be considered. Because then basically what the states would be arguing is we don't have the time to sort people out. The reason we're requiring vaccines is because administratively it's very hard to distinguish, well, where are you in terms of your natural antibodies? That doesn't really hold very well, right? Because you have the same problem with vaccines. People tend to have dropping protection over time from their vaccines. And you can test antibodies, like you can test if someone has COVID. So I think that that's another area that the science may be complicating the legal basis for these states.
What about this issue of religious exemptions? How do you prove a sincerely held religious exemption?
Well, of course, that's a problem that we deal with all the time because many people ask for exemptions from taxation and other forms of government obligations. Sometimes the government challenges that. It happens all the time in the IRS. I wrote a piece many decades ago on this very issue for the academic press because those of us who teach constitutional law grapple with how do you define a legitimate religion. But there's actually an office in the Internal Revenue Service that just does this matter-of-factly every day, right? There's a bureaucrat that sits there and goes, no, that's fraudulent, this is not, that's fraudulent, this is not. And they have to make that decision because people are exempting themselves from taxation or other obligations. So the courts have to make that decision. So how do they do it? Well, they look at whether it's a recognized religion, even if it's not a recognized, more sort of marginalized religion. They look at a proven or sort of demonstration of faith through having a structure to your religion or rules or recognized sort of procedures of your religion. So it's a case-by-case decision that courts have to make.
Some faith leaders have very publicly come forward, though, and said, look, our religion really has nothing against vaccines. So when that happens, does that sort of blow the exemption argument out of the water? If the leader of your particular church or religion is saying, no, we have no vaccine objections.
Yeah, that really does undermine it. But the problem is that you can still have religious beliefs different from your church hierarchy. Then the court is in the position of trying to decide whether this is still a bona fide religious belief, even if it's not supported by the church hierarchy. A good example of that is the Mormon Church had a lot of fractures on polygamy. There are some groups that would spin off from the Mormon Church on plural unions, but they were still following religious views. So I don't think that would end the issue. It would make it a little more difficult to prevail, but I don't think that the court should just simply disregard a religious claim because the hierarchy of the church does not agree with that interpretation.
Seattle and Chicago are two of the big cities that have become real flashpoints for the issue of police, especially who aren't vaccinated and who may lose their jobs or lose pay or lose benefits if they try to resign over this vaccination issue. In Chicago, though, the police union leader zeroed in on the portal where city employees are supposed to report vaccination status, raising a broader concern about sharing medical information. What about that as a strategy to fight the mandate?
Yeah, that's a very interesting claim because, as you know, we have a number of state and federal laws protecting medical information. I'm not too sure why the city requires that portal. It seems like an easy thing for the city to resolve, even if they're going to confirm vaccinated status. But there's also just a public policy question. The question is, with deaths dropping, do governments, both state and federal, still want to create these bright line rules? I talked to a physician in New York who was really he's very pro-vaccine. He's a very well recognized figure in the field, but he was apoplectic. I mean, they were looking at getting rid of about 20% of their staff, doctors and nurses who didn't want to take the vaccine. Many of them have recovered from COVID, and they don't see the reason for doing so when they have natural antibodies. And he was telling me, what are we supposed to do? You know, we can't just lose 20% of our staff. And I think that that's something that is worth a public debate. You know, is this approach, which is a very bright line, the only way that we can proceed in this respect?
Is any of this any different for professional athletes from a legal standpoint? Because obviously not everyone with a job has a contract. But let's say if someone like Kyrie Irving of the Brooklyn Nets, who's not vaccinated and is now benched, what would happen if he's sued over not being able to play and losing a lot of his pay in the process?
No, I don't think there is a difference. He is a private employee, and private employers are being asked to maintain this bright line and to require vaccinations. If anything, these sports teams are in a better position because they are mandating a vaccine in areas where people are in close contact, there's heavy breathing. It's not like some other sports where people are separated. So, they could make medical-based arguments that it's even more important for them as a private employer to have this rule. But as a general matter, as private employers are in very good position requiring these rules.
If vaccine mandates continue to hold up legally, will employers then have the power to also demand booster shots?
Yes, I think that they very well could. Once again, these employers could argue that they're trying to make the workplace as safe as possible, even though the necessity of booster shots may not have been established so far. There's a lot we don't know about boosters, how long these vaccines are remaining viable in terms of protection. Also, we have the declining numbers of cases in many states. But also we have a lot of unknowns with regards to the variants and breakthrough cases. Will the boosters have this type of effect against some of these new variants? We even have a new variant coming out of England, which is worrying a lot of folks. So there's a lot of moving parts here. But as a general rule, I think courts are going to be supportive of companies adopting these types of vaccine requirements, including boosters, particularly when the CDC is behind them. The CDC is the big dog on the block when it comes to court review.
Jonathan Turley, George Washington University law professor and Fox News contributor, thank you very much for your time.
My great pleasure.
This is Tammy Bruce with your Fox News commentary coming up.
He was there from almost the beginning.
I am officially running for President of the United States.
Not long after Donald Trump entered the race, Keith Kellogg, a retired Army Lieutenant General, joined the Republicans' campaign as an advisor. Then after the 2016 Trump victory, he went to the White House as part of the national security team and stayed there to the bitter end, January 20th.
And I can tell you that from the bottom of my heart, this has been an incredible 4 years.
Now, General Keith Kellogg has written a book about it all.
Things started in the Oval Office of the president. Said, he looked at me and said, "You've been with me longer than anybody else has. You ought to write a book. You've seen it all."
The book's out this week titled War by Other Means, a General in the Trump White House.
I saw a president that the people don't see, and when the Klieg lights come on, it's a different president. And when people think about his hard tweets, but when I was with him, Dave, I saw the way he felt about America. And he's unabashedly pro-American. He loves America, loves our military going forward. He's wicked smart. His instincts are incredible, are off the charts on what he wants to do. He makes decisions rapidly, and they're good, hard decisions, and he sticks with those decisions through thick or thin. And I wanted America to see, because it's a different type of person that was portrayed in the press out there, and they've got it wrong, because I saw him. I mean, I saw him for longer than anybody else in the White House in the national security realm.
You wrote, yes, he can be profane. Yes, he's willing to say publicly things many of us would only say in private. Yes, he can be aggressive, but then you write about how he's candid, you wrote to a fault, and caring in a way that most people didn't see. Yeah. A lot of people listening, and a lot of people who certainly would have never voted for him, just don't imagine that person exists.
Yeah, in the middle of the COVID, or in the middle of the outbreak going there, we were sitting in the Oval one day, and we were just talking, because sometimes I just stand around and put my hand on the couch and just sit there and BS with him and Newton. And he looked at me and said, I just want Americans to get better. Just in that tone of voice, I said, Mr. President, go on and say that right now to the American people. And he goes, no. He said, what the American people want and expect the leader to be very, very strong going forward. He said, but that's how I feel. And I know that's how he felt about it.
You wanted to be part of his campaign. You reached out, and then it worked out that you were an advisor to candidate Trump, and then you stayed the whole time, all the way to the last day of the administration, and we'll get to January 6th. But why? Why there the whole time? So many people don't stick around. They stay, they get burnt out. There's a lot of effort. There's a lot of work. Obviously disagreement at times.
We were constantly under siege. From before we even came into the administration and started, people were against us from the very start. And I don't care if it was Russiagate or whatever it was out there, but he was always trying to do good things. And I said, this is a man I want to stay with. And I've always believed in loyalty. And it's a very, very hard predicate for me that, as long as you have loyalty and staying with person, even if you don't agree with him. And he would allow me to disagree with him all the time. If I didn't say, agree with what he was saying or doing, I'd say it to him, and he bought into that, but I wouldn't go public with it. And Dave, people need to tell me, okay, I know you don't like his hard tweets or what he said.
That was a big part of it.
But tell me the bad policies we had. I can't find anybody who's telling me our policies were bad.
But style sometimes matters a lot more than substance to some people. And were there times that he would say something that was brash or tweet something that was what people thought was over the line that you yourself would say, oh, why did he do that?
Yeah. I would, and if I thought there was something, I'd go in there and I'd make a comment to him about it. But I also understood one thing, that there were times that people didn't understand. He was the president of the United States. He got more electoral votes than I get. I didn't get any. People need to understand this is a man who actually did listen, and he had a very Socratic way of doing it. He'd go around the room and ask questions, and he would force you to defend your position. And if you defended your positions well, he may not like it, but he would accept it. And he did that on several occasions.
Though others have said, he ignored advice, or he was disinterested in briefings, and then he would say a comment, well, I know more, I'm smarter than the generals, or something like that, which undercuts what you're saying, that he was engaged in all these briefings. Was he always engaged in the briefings?
No, he was always there. He was a very, very prolific reader. When we used to travel during the campaign, he would read the Wall Street Journal, he'd read the New York Times, he'd read the Washington Post, he'd read the Financial Times going forward, and a local newspaper as well. He would always read and go through them. And he would read the articles, and he'd circle these articles, and he'd rip them out of the paper and put them on a box next to him. And he would keep this box of notes that he'd taken to himself. And he was exceptionally well read. And so when people say he wasn't well read, I said baloney. But
there was a caricature, though, General, of a guy who just watched cable news all day, and he would try to hire a Fox commentator, a Fox contributor, because he's watching Fox all day, and that all this executive time, and he was golfing all the time. That's another of the things that people had said about the president.
But he spent an awful lot of time in the Oval Office too, sitting around talking, long meetings, not short meetings, long ones. So when people said that, I said, okay, yep, they watch TV, sure, but was he well read? Sure. And, you'd have to tell people, okay, I kind of seen him where people didn't see that. So that's the reason one of the reasons I wrote the book, and also why I'm so comfortable talking about it, because I was there. They weren't in the room. I was.
You shifted, though, from being an advisor to President Trump to Vice President Pence. And I thought it was very interesting that you wrote in the book that the Secret Service had their own codes for the president and vice president, but you had yours, and yours show the differences between the two men.
Yeah, it was his nickname by the Secret Service was Mogul, and the vice president was Hoosier from the state of Indiana. Right. I call him Fire and Ice. And I said because it was so different between the two of them. And the president was very dynamic, when I say on fire, you operate in what I'd call as Trump time. When he wanted something done now, give me the reason why we're not doing it right away, why we're pushing it. By the way, that's one of the reasons why we got 3 vaccines in record time because of COVID, because he pushed everybody to get there. If we'd run the normal bureaucratic process, we'd still be looking for a COVID vaccine going forward. Mike Pence, on the other time, was very reserved, very laid back, and in a sense laid back. He would never come out and push things in a very vocal and hard manner. In fact, the entire time I was with Vice President Pence, I never heard him swear one time. I mean, I would get 3 swear words out of the president within an hour, and it was just they're different styles, and they were complementary styles.
Then came January 6th. When President Trump, who insisted the election was stolen by fraud he was unable to prove in court, told a rally it was up to Republicans in Congress to fix
this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
But that's not what happened. Trump supporters stormed the Capitol, an attack that halted the election certification. But hours after they were cleared out, it resumed. And early in the next morning, Vice President Pence did not challenge the results.
Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 306 votes,
making him president-elect. Then President Trump was impeached again, accused of inciting what Democrats called an insurrection.
Look, that was not an insurrection, okay? That was a riot gone bad. And when they had gone down there, we didn't know that was going on until we got back to the Oval Office, until we saw it on TV. And the vice president, we kept very good track of him. The president asked me during all of this where the vice president was, and I had good control of where he was at because I was talking to the Secret Service at the same time because we had an ability to talk to them, and I knew exactly where he was at. He was in the basement of the Senate building. So we saw that going on. It was an unfortunate day, but anybody who said, come on, I've seen worse riots going on, and that was, to me, a riot gone bad.
But during it, for hours, didn't hear much from the president, and then he made like a taped speech, and he seemed to, in it, praise at least or at least acknowledge that the support that he was getting from these people, and that didn't go over very well either. Did you at all sense that he wasn't involved in trying to stop the riot, that he didn't...
Yeah. No, not at all. In fact, when this thing first started, he is the one who said to the chief of staff of the White House, and I was there in the Oval when Mark Meadows came out and said, "Where's the National Guard?" Looked at me and said that. And we found that there was supposed to be National Guard on the streets, and what happened was that the Defense Department held them up because they didn't like the, quote, optics of that going forward. Look, if we had the intelligence this was going to go bad, don't you think the Capitol Police would have upgunned? Don't you think the U.S. Marshal Service would have upgunned at the time? None of them were ready for it, and they're prepared for it. So we had to react to it. And anytime you get into a situation like that, when you're reacting something, you're already behind the curve.
Have you been asked by the House Select Committee investigating to testify?
Not yet, but I'm sure my name's on the list. I am sure they haven't yet. I think they're talking to a lot of others, but I'm ready to it. And it's sort of like I did with the Mueller Commission as well. You know, I was the first one in the White House to go talk to the Mueller Commission, and I said I'm willing to do it. And I'm going to go there. Candidly, I'm going to go up there with a lawyer too. I don't need a lawyer. I'll tell them exactly what I saw, what I heard.
Well, in his book that just came out Tuesday, General Kellogg goes into detail also about President Trump's plan to end the war in Afghanistan. And he's critical of the chaotic withdrawal under President Biden, demanding someone be held accountable, calling for a 9/11 type commission to investigate.
Yeah, I just think the whole 20-year war needs to be looked at. Actually, 18-year war, because the first 2 years to me were righteous. When you go after Al-Qaeda, you go after bin Laden and the rest of them, that's a righteous kind of war. But the last 18 years, we were doing something that we shouldn't have ever been doing, which is nation building. We're involved in tribal warfare. We had thousands killed, thousands more wounded, hundreds of billions of dollars have spent, and we lost a war. And now just, okay, what are we having for breakfast tomorrow? That's wrong. I wanted to get out because one of the concerns I had talking to President Trump, even when he was a candidate, was until we disengaged ourselves from the Middle East, keep focus there but not total focus, we can then focus on the Russians and the Chinese. And especially with the Chinese. Look, the reason they have hypersonic weapons and we don't is we took our eye off the R&D ball. We're not worried about that. Well, we should. Look what's happened now. They've got hypersonic weapons that, by the way, when I say hypersonic, most people go, okay, they've got a hypersonic weapon. This is Mach 5 and higher. This is a system that flies at a mile in 2 seconds or less. You can tip it with a conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead going forward. And they've got them, and we're still in the R&D phase. Okay, that's a game changer.
The book is War by Other Means, a general in the Trump White House, from former National Security Advisor for both President Trump and Vice President Pence, now retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. Again, congratulations on your book, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. I do appreciate it.
Hey, it's Brett Larson, inviting you to download and listen to the new daily Fox on Tech podcast. There's part of a colorful late 90s iMac on Mars. It's an idea that seems a lot like Kickstarter, called Build It. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary. Tammy Bruce. What's on your mind?
For a good reason, there have been more than a few references in social media to The Truman Show, a 1998 Jim Carrey film about a man living what he thinks is a totally normal life, but in fact is a completely contrived reality show. He slowly grows to realize that his friends, family, and everyone else populating his life are actors, with thousands of cameras secreted throughout his town, filming everything he does for a worldwide audience. In the late 1990s, everyone considered the premise absurd. Fast forward to the 21st century, and reality television is standard fare. But it's the Biden administration's behavior that has reminded us of what it's like to be presented with something that is meant to appear as real and natural, but is nothing other than orchestrated and contrived. Things you see that are supposed to be genuine are instead fake sets with fake actors delivered by fake news. At first, it was the bizarre revelation that the Biden administration had constructed a set across the street from the White House to be used in place of the Oval Office, East Room, and, any other White House location for a public statement or meeting. It was constructed to give the appearance that Mr. Biden is in the White House, which he leaves to go to the fake set of the same building. Stephen Miller, the founder of America First Legal, proposed, quote, the reason Biden uses this bizarre virtual set for televised meetings and not an actual room like the East Room, Cabinet, Oval, Roosevelt, Situation Room, etc., is because it allows him to read a script directly from a face-on monitor. Well, it's fair to say this sort of perplexing development only heightens Americans' concern about whether Mr. Biden can run the country and increases anxiety about his administration appearing to rely on lies as opposed to the transparency and clarity we all demand. Contrived situations, sets, and scripts aren't just for Joe Biden. Vice President Kamala Harris is also into the act. As multiple crises continue to unfold in the United States, the Vice President of Border, Election Integrity, Space Force czar, Kamala, decided her time would be best spent participating in a video for a YouTube original series called Get Curious, promoting space and science to kids. Inexplicably, it seems everything Ms. Harris does becomes a disaster, and this was no different. The video was mocked as bizarre, with her expressions and delivery exaggerated and manufactured. Just when you think it can't get any worse, we find it can with the Biden-Harris crowd. After the withering criticism of her space video behavior, it was revealed that the kids involved were all actors. The entire thing was fake. The reliance on control in theater is now so integral for this gang. Everything has to be scripted. Every word must be controlled. Ironically, their handlers don't realize that in their frenzy to demonstrate that Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris are genuine, caring, and competent, they expose them as none of the above. Have we missed the mark this entire time by not considering that the swampy bureaucracy running the Biden-Harris show actually views Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris as nothing more than actors? In all fairness, while they work diligently to ruin our futures, Ms. Harris may be thinking about her next act. Like Mr. and Mrs. Obama, she could be eyeing the money and power in Hollywood. It would be good for her to have a plan B if this audition for acting president doesn't work out. Maybe she could star in a reboot of the television show Veep. She's certainly ready for that. This is Tammy Bruce, host of Get Tammy Bruce, now streaming on Fox Nation.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Did you hear the news? Now you can. With instant updates from Fox News for Amazon Alexa. Just say,
Alexa, play news from Fox.
In Fox News.
It's the latest when you need it. On demand from Fox News and Amazon Alexa.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.